Professor Gil Conchas, thanks for coming in today to talk a little bit about your background, your research, and advice for potential students. And I'm very excited today in particular because I have a fellow sociologist here,
Yes.
a fellow alumni from working in the Bill and Melinda Gates
Yes.
Foundation. We share such a common background, so this will be particularly fun for me.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I think an interesting place to start would be to tell us a little bit about your journey. Why did you end up becoming a sociologist and a sociologist that looked at education in particular?
Well, I think in order to understand what I do, I think it's important to understand who I am. And I am the son of Mexican immigrant farm workers. I am an anchor baby. Uh, and the kind of questions I ask relate to that certain kind of upbringing. And so I attended Berkeley as an undergraduate and majored in sociology. And I didn't quite know, what a career in you obtain a degree in sociology as an undergrad, you don't quite know what you do with it. It was at the end of my sophomore year that I obtained a summer internship with a sociologist at UCSB, UC Santa Barbara, by the name of Denise Segura, who obtained her PhD in sociology from UC Berkeley. At the time, she was an assistant professor and she was doing work that now is recognized as triple oppression among Chicanas. And she was doing this survey of job satisfaction among Chicana workers. And I learned how to do simple statistical analysis, ANOVAs. And from that experience, I said, I want to be a sociologist, looking at issues of social inequality impacting marginalized communities. And Denise said, Gil, I think, you're going to be really good at this. You should apply for the Minority Opportunity Summer Training Program through the American Sociological Association. I did. She wrote letters for me, and I was admitted into that prestigious summer program that is intended to create a pipeline of underrepresented minority folks that go into PhD programs in sociology. And I had the privilege of working with some of the top sociologists of our time, Robert Blauner, who is probably considered one of the fathers of American race relations. I worked with Mike Hout, who studies issues of stratification. I worked with Martin Sanchez-Jankowski, who is an urban ethnographer and he studies gangs. And from that experience, I knew I wanted to be a sociologist. But what brought me to sociology was very different than what I intended. I first decided to go to grad school to study youth gangs and really ask questions about why do certain boys of color join gangs and others don't? Why is it that some boys join gangs that might come from the same family or the same community? And I think you know where I'm going, asking these kind of questions. Because my little brother is currently serving a life prison sentence for second-degree murder because of a gang fight. And so I took that with me to the University of Michigan and asked these kind of pivotal questions. And my dissertation committee, interestingly enough, was composed of a demographer, a survey methodologist, and a comparative historical sociologist. And it was co-chaired by Barbara Anderson, who's a demographer. From her, I learned the love of demography and really put into perspective what quantitative work can be. On the other end was Tomás Amaguer, who was my other advisor, and he did comparative historical sociology. And from there, I developed that thirst to do mixed method work, but really asked more questions about process, how and why questions. And that lent itself to doing more case studies, qualitative case studies, which brought me to work in education. Because I think, is it Max Weber who taught us to have a value-free sociology? So I thought, well, maybe studying gangs at the time was too close to me. So I took the same question and applied it to the educational setting. And I asked, well, why is it that some ethnic minorities do well in school and others do not? How do we look at this comparatively? For blacks, for brown kids, for Asians, in particular Vietnamese and the Hmong. And inverted the question, and instead of asking, why do kids of color fail, I asked, why do some succeed despite the odds?
Yeah, and this is the book, The Color of Success,
Yes, The Color
right?
of Success. Yes, that's my first book, The Color of Success. But before we move on, I want to tell a little anecdote. So again, I'm a first generation son of Mexican immigrant farm workers. I enrolled in graduate school, and I would have daily conversations with my parents, in particular my father. And I'd call him on the phone, and we'd have conversations. I said, mijo, ¿qué es lo que estás haciendo? I said, mijo, what is it that you're doing? I said, papá, estoy estudiando sociología. Dad, I'm studying sociology. ¿Qué? Psicología. He was a psychologist. No, Dad, sociology. And I would explain to him what sociology is, what I'm doing. Finally, he would say, he said, mijo, son, so long as you're doing good things for our people. So I took that sense of empathy and social justice to the kind of work that I do. Yeah. So in a long way, this is
Right.
who I am and what I do in terms of academia.
Yeah, and it also makes sense you were drawn to the Berkeley Sociology Department.
Absolutely.
Where that work of using social science to understand people's situation and challenges and barriers in society to address them better and make a more equitable society has been deeply infused in that group's work for a long time.
Absolutely. John Ogbu, of course, was a Berkeley professor, and his work dominated the field for, I would say, over 30 years in trying to understand a minority school success and failure. And his theory, so I think it was ecological theory of school performance, dominated for many years. Why is it that some minorities do well and others don't? Really had a deep cultural perspective. And there was a group of us when we were doctoral students that at the time were trying to make sense of Ogbu's theories and apply a more structural understanding of it. And some of my contemporaries, we had the Spencer Dissertation Fellowship, and then we later became Spencer Dissertation postdocs. We became assistant professors at Harvard. I'm here now as a full professor. Prudence Carter is now the dean of the School of Education at Berkeley. But our original work addressed, what did Ogbu miss, right? With his whole notion of voluntary and involuntary minorities. My contribution was The Color of Success, in that I said, Ogbu, you typically are right when it comes to the low achieving groups. But where he got it wrong is the school level factors, the institutional processes that created for these disparities.
Yeah, there's still a little bit of the deficit approach in Ogbu's work, right?
Absolutely. So all of us, to this day, try to take more of an asset approach in understanding the lived experiences of racialized groups in society.
And I think of your work, Prudence Carter's also, it's very careful to portray the complexity and the richness of people's lives, their voices, their providing a narrative account of their life situations. Why do you think that's so important for people to recognize?
Well, I think there's only so much that a variable can tell us. It can tell us about generalizability. They can tell us about certain outcomes, right? But I think what's missing are these deep stories of why people do the things they do and how they do it. It illuminates the processes. And the importance for us is not for generalizability, but really to expand upon existing theoretical propositions in the way that I did with Agbu's work, right? Or the way that I'm currently doing in my new study with Omi and Winon's canonical work on racial formation in the United States, right? Does qualitative research and the patterns that we see with this kind of work speak with and to these theories? And how does that help us as sociologists make sense of the lived realities of the people that we study?
And I know another thing you've been involved with deeply for many, many years is partnerships. Yes. Sometimes we call it university community engagement. Sometimes we call it research practice partnerships. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy and approach to how university and university researchers can engage with schools in the community.
Well, first of all, a lot of my work speaks to the importance of context. So social context matters. If we look at the what they call the so-called achievement gaps, what we're really looking at are these opportunity gaps that impact schools and teachers' ability for them to do their job. What happens when a kid comes to school hungry? What happens when a kid comes to school and has health issues? What happens if the kid is walking to school and he or she is going to get jumped by a gang? So I think that building the kind of bridges with community entities are important to address the real achievement gaps. And those are the opportunity gaps. So in my work, I try to partner with schools, school districts, community-based organizations, and work with them in terms of what their needs are. I think working with community entities will allow us to have a more holistic understanding of what is necessary to really make sure that every child has the opportunity to succeed. And work that's mutually beneficial, that's reciprocal, is important. And I think that when I was at the Gates Foundation, that's one of the approaches I took, is the kind of research, fund research that takes this kind of holistic approach, fund research that looks at it through different methodological lenses. But what I've always also tried to do when I was at Gates, as well as what I do as a professor now, is to help train the next generation of scholars that are doing this kind of work. So if I gave, let's say, the largest grant I gave was $8 million to Jeannie Oakes when she was at UCLA. And she has this program where they would train the next generation of PhDs to do what they call research that makes a difference. And so I always try to make sure that you fund a senior scholar that will mentor the next generation. And I think that would be, an important asset as we try to create a pipeline going forward. And I think that stems from my experience. Had I not had those experiences with Denise Segura, Bob Blount, or Mike Hout, maybe I wouldn't be here today. Maybe I'd be a lawyer or something else.
So is this mentoring piece key not just to your philosophy, but also kind of what you see as critical in moving certain students to success and others not to success? Is that mentorship, that connection to adults in these professional roles critical?
Absolutely. I think relationships matter, issues of personalization matter, and the institutional agents matter, where we gain that kind of social capital, those intangible resources one gains through networks and relationships that teaches us, especially us that come from low-income communities where our parents are not professionals, where the adults around us are not professional. So what does it mean to be a doctor? What does it mean to be a lawyer, right? And my work in career academies is important because a lot of these kids don't have that kind of social scaffolding. But in the summer, they have internships. So if they're in an engineering academy, or they're in a law academy, or they're in a medical academy, they're shadowing a doctor, they're working with a doctor, or a lawyer or an engineer to provide them with the important information necessary for them to have that sense of, I can be a doctor, I can be a lawyer. Right?
So let's talk even a little further about these kind of career academy models, because I know, Gil, you were involved really from the inception of this idea, working with David Stern at Berkeley on defining and rolling out the first few career academies in Oakland and elsewhere.
Yes. I was a undergraduate at UC Berkeley when I had my first work study assignment, and that's working at Oakland Technical High School, where they developed the very first career academy in California, the Health and Bioscience Academy. David Stern at the time was the director of the National Center for Vocational Education. And we were trying to make sense at the time of how to take voc ed, right, and give it that rigor necessary for kids to reach the UC or the CSU. And of course, vocational ed has always been stigmatized as further tracking. And people say, well, career academies do the same thing. They track kids into these careers, but it's not the case. Kids have to go to undergrad, and in order to become a doctor or a lawyer or engineer, you have to go to grad school, right? So it's not tracking kids. It's really giving them, the kids, that personalization, the relationship building, and the work that through my own research, it matches their aspirations with their expectations. And I think that's pivotal. A lot of kids have aspirations, but do they expect to do that 20 years from now? And why? Because it provides them, again, with that social scaffolding. The structural components, the cultural components, the cultural capital, the social capital necessary for them to have these ideas and to have the necessary information of what it takes, not only to succeed in high school, succeed in college, and move on into grad school.
A very super exciting model, and I remember I wasn't far away from it either. I remember visiting Oakland Tech to observe that, and then down the street at Castlemont High School, we set up this computer technology academy based on that same model.
Wow.
So, but I know you also work here in, you've worked with Valley High.
I've worked with Valley High in Santa Ana, and for 3 years we were instrumental in helping them redesign into small learning communities. They've had 5 or 6 career academies, but some were stronger than others. And so they decided to be the pilot site to convert into all career academy. And so we help from working with teachers on revamping their syllabus for the rigors of the CSU and the UC A to G requirements. And helped with kind of the culture of the culture shift, which is important because you have senior teachers there who are resistant to change, and I feel that this is just not what they want to do right at that point in time. So it took 3 years really to see this change, and working directly with the school leaders, directly with the teachers and parents, and the importance of the career academy model. And I often say that it's not the career itself. I think that gives it a focus. I think the important thing is for these kids to have a sense that they can be college students and they can become professionals in the future.
And yeah, it's been exciting to kind of work and visit Valley High here in Orange County and get deeper in the Orange County schools in general. But of course, we also are trying to lean into our work here at UCI and serving undergraduate students here. you've been involved in some of that at the with the community, with the UCI Engage
Yes.
efforts. Now that we're an Hispanic serving institution, what do you think the role is of kind of community engagement for our undergraduates in particular?
I think that our undergrads already have a commitment to their communities. I think that our commitment is to give our students the tools necessary to go back to their communities to make the kind of difference they want to make. I think that we ought to think creatively what we do in our classroom to make sure that we train them and give them credit for the kind of work that maybe we need them to do in the communities. Service learning is one way that we can do that. How can we embed our students in organizations throughout Orange County to look at the pressing issues that they have and think creatively with these organizations of what's necessary. So it's more like somewhere like an internship or an apprenticeship, right? Where our kids will learn in the classroom and take what they learn in their classroom out in the real community, right? So I think it's our commitment as a Hispanic serving institution, right? As a land grant institution, to take our social capital, right? Our knowledge, and give it to our kids so they can further their civic engagement in the communities they came from.
Yeah. So both an institutional imperative for us, but also aligned with your research and thinking, importance of internships, apprenticeships, mentorship, connecting students to the broader community.
Yep. I like to say that we've created this huge educational debt for our brown kids or black kids, our yellow kids, our red kids, if you will. And oftentimes reforms don't work. But I think Derek Bell said once, just because something is difficult doesn't mean we can't do it. So that's the kind of approach that I like to take. And I think that the young generation, first generation students coming to Irvine are hungry for that knowledge and are hungry to make sure that they don't want to repeat what they went through as low-income students for their kids and for generations to come, right? So it's not just a social justice imperative, it's an economic imperative.
And there is something really new about this moment we're living in. We haven't had major research universities in the US before that are 50% first generation, 85% non-white. There's something here, an opportunity here to do something that could really be a model for the country as a whole.
And I think you as a dean are on the right track, where the School of Education can take the lead in that endeavor.
I think that's a great way to end. Thanks for coming in today to speak with us.
Thank you, Dean Arum. I appreciate it.